Thank you so much for joining us for another episode right here on Connecting Conversations. I'm Carla, co-founder of Cohesia Connect, and I'm so delighted to be joined by our incredible guest, Hannah Bevan. Hannah, how are you?
Hi, Carla. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. All very good, thank you.
It's such a privilege to have you with us today. And before we get going into our conversation, it's just been amazing to chat to someone. For those of you who don't know, I'm based in the Southeast, and Hannah is based all the way in Wales. And what I love to do is connect with people all over the UK. We're on this diversity, equity, and inclusion journey together, and it's such an important thing to connect, isn't it, Hannah? Because I feel like nowadays we realize that we might all have kind of kindred hearts about really impacting change and driving fairness in the places that we work or in the places that we volunteer or we do life in. But a big part of that is actually connecting. And I was privileged enough to meet Hannah literally at a call to action on LinkedIn, wasn't it? And that's how we've met. How was that process for you? Did you expect to get some interesting hits? And were you expecting to find someone like me?
I don't know what I expected, really. And obviously, when we first met, as I said to you, I think it was an opportunity for me to mark 1 year of working in a full-time D&I role. And yeah, I think maybe and maybe I didn't expect people from across the world, really, to reach out. So yeah, I made some good contacts, and still talking to them now. And I think that, as I said to you when we met, and I know that we'll touch on it probably a little bit later on, but working in D&I is a lonely place, because I suppose there's many of us doing it, but independently. So to be able to connect, and the point of that call for action was for me to broaden my network, and it clearly worked. So, and here I am.
Absolutely. I think I think you're in my book the example of what it means to just take that chance and reach out. And I think just in doing that was such a step of bravery and courage, but also just it highlighted something that I feel like certainly someone receiving and seeing that call to action was like so encouraging, because I feel you can clearly feel, as much as this may feel isolating sometimes, but we're actually really not alone, and how much we really need the community of those behind us, even though we might be working in very different sectors. Diversity and inclusion is a huge umbrella and spectrum, isn't it? But at the end of the day, to find our people and our tribe who care about really important things is what really keeps the movement moving forward. So it's been absolutely amazing getting to know you, and I trust that it will continue to remain, that this broad network just continues to grow for you as you endeavor on your journey as well. Can I tell us a little bit about yourself? You mentioned like this has been a year that you mark in actually working full time in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. How did you first become aware of the issues around diversity and inclusion?
I think that, like, maybe subconsciously I've always been aware of them. Going through, like anyone else, life struggles myself. So I came out to my parents at quite a young age as a gay woman. So I think that level of life experience, it was brought very quickly to my attention that I was different from your, I suppose, the typical person. And then I suppose as life went on, I had significant challenges with mental health. And I suppose without even thinking about it, I thought, no one else talks about this around me, so I'm not going to talk about it. And I think that until I did open up about, one of those things, opening up about my mental health struggles, I then I wear my heart on my sleeve anyway. And at that point, I was like, just sort of like blurted everything out. And at that point, did I go, hang on now, why is it taking for me to get to the lowest of lows for me to start doing this? So DEI was like, I suppose, if anything, 5% of my old role. So I come from the sports sector. So I've worked in sport for 8 years in an NGB, in the same NGB. So I suppose seeing an NGB take a journey in terms of diversity and inclusion, and how slow paced that can be, and how the small wins work, and those type of things. So I think that coming from a job that it didn't take up too much of my time because it couldn't, everything else was coming before it, So then looking for new opportunities and seeing, the opportunity that I've got, and that, the role I'm in now with BBC Wales, is to work in it full time. I almost feel like, why didn't I do this earlier? Because the reason I left sport is because I really struggled to, I suppose, see, feel, hear the impact that I was having in my role. But working in DEI, as much as, yes, there's slow progress, and we can't solve everything overnight, and it's not our role to solve everything overnight, but to see the impact quite quickly that I can have in a full-time role has been, very telling to me. So I suppose that's where now I know that where my passion is, like, absolutely. But seeing the glimpse of it within sport definitely helped steered me in this direction.
That's an incredible journey to have had, and quite rightly, as you say, within quite a short window of time.
Yeah.
And if anything, I hope that anybody that comes across this conversation will be encouraged that actually, why wait? Where's the opportunity? And normally we don't, if it's something that's you find yourself in a natural inclination towards, or you find yourself in a passion, it's quite close by where you'll find that first opportunity. It might not look very grandeur to begin with, but like you said, you were following the footsteps or just the breadcrumbs of where you were. And I think that to hear that is really encouraging for the next person. I think you pose a really good question then, why didn't I get into this sooner? And it's lovely to hear that from, in terms of you see the impact of what it means to just get involved, find your community, find the space where you can be made kind of a support, probably for someone else, or a mouthpiece for someone else that maybe doesn't have the ability to use their voice. What would you say in terms of, within this short space of time that you've seen such change, what have been some of the key things that you've noticed that have been really, like, in kind of like a progressive way? What's been really good to see come out of that season that you've been involved with DEI particularly?
I think the change I've seen is when I think about when I first started getting introduced to what obviously we referred to quite often as, equality back in the day. I think the change has evolved from the formal training courses, and you sit in a room, part of a team, you're being told about, the protected characteristics, the Equality Act, and how you should be more inclusive, how you can do that, potential barriers and those type of things. But I think that's a very, I suppose, quite limited view of diversity. And I think that the biggest learning for me has been, and it does take time to build confidence of people, but the impact of lived experiences. And I think that from an organizational perspective, when I think about like the formal training opportunities I've been on and I've coordinated versus and coming into a new space now where I got the time to do it full time, the lived experience panel, so getting staff members and getting people to share how, being disabled has impacted them, how they've fought mental health struggles, and coming out stories and those type of things. That has been the feedback I've had from that, and the conversations we've had during the sessions been far more impactful than sitting in a training course from 9 till 5 with a team, all learning all about equality when actually everyone else is thinking about getting back to their day job. And I think that learning from people has got to be the most impactful, and that's what I love about my job. But it has to be the most impactful form of learning that anyone can have. And I think that when I reflect on that, and if we can encourage anyone, so any one person, to just go and have a conversation with someone they wouldn't typically have a conversation with, they will definitely learn even if it's one thing. And if we continue to do that on a part of daily habit, weekly habit, and those type of things, that's got to be the biggest learning for me. Is that's where we learn the most, is from other people, not from this scripted training courses. They've got their time and their place. I'm not saying they haven't, but learning from people who have lived the challenges has got to be the most impactful.
I think that's such a powerful thing to kind of raise right now, and I think you're absolutely right. In the time frame that you've spoken about, we've seen quite a progression, haven't we? Of this is a scripted kind of course, follow the guidelines, tick the boxes, And we really needed to come away from that, because what we found as a result of those, that people are not really seeing the human value behind the intention originally of what those courses were supposed to do in terms of creating awareness. And also it became, it's kind of disconnected to the actual impact of what this was doing to those that were on the receiving end of marginalization, isn't it? Yeah. And I love what you say there. I think that's such a powerful quote. And probably what I'm going to use as the title for this conversation is learning from people is probably the most impactful form of learning. And I think, there's something to, like you said, it takes us courage as well to kind of step out of comfort zones, isn't it? This is not a place where necessarily people feel confident. There's a huge spectrum that is involved with the ideas behind diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. Lots of different groups of people that might be very different to us, different, subscription to belief systems or understandings, philosophies, perceptions of the world and experiences all together. How do we find our ways to get connected is to, go and talk to them, have conversations, be open to hearing the real life story and experience. And I agree with you so much, is so, so powerful. And in terms of that, I think it leads really well into kind of like my next question. In your discovery of this incredible, powerful tool that is now occupying, I think, thankfully, a more of a central space on how DEI is approached. It's the learned experiences of others. Have you seen kind of the development of allyship and all of that? Tell us a little bit about where you've seen that come into play as a result of this amazing progress.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think just to reflect on actually something you just said around the power of it, the biggest thing for me is having a conversation with someone you wouldn't typically have a conversation with is free. It doesn't cost a thing. Whereas when we think of education, we're all about, we haven't got enough resource, we haven't got enough bedsheet, we can't do that. But actually, everyone's entitled to that free education of just speaking to other people. And I think that when it came to me hosting my first, lived experience panel session, that's what I just looked around the room and I could just see people's reaction to it. And, the feedback was invaluable off the back of it. And it's feedback you would never get from any formal training course. But I think that coming back to the point about where it takes us, and that I suppose the actual impact that we can have with it, and in terms of the allyship stuff, is allies are naturally, I suppose, or allyship is naturally brought out in people when they attend these type of sessions, because I think that without understanding, and again just reflecting on scripted training versus non-scripted training and actual lived experience training, is people can empathize completely, because that person delivering it is delivering it from a personal circumstance. They're explaining how it made them feel, and they're giving detail about those type of things. And I think that when people can either feel the passion or feel the upset and the sadness and the frustration that comes from this person who's talking about their lived experience and the challenges, far more empathy is developed naturally within that. So when it comes to allyship, I think that people leave those type of sessions and go, do you know what? I've really listened. I'm actively listened there, and I don't want the next person to feel like they did. Whereas I think when you genuinely talk about allyship, and it's about supporting others regardless of different circumstances and life experiences and those type of things, it sounds nice. But I don't think until you really engage with people that are not like you, can you understand what allyship is. And that's what these lived experiences, the sessions bring to that, I think.
I think that sounds amazing. And I don't think that everybody, has had the privilege of engaging in approaches like you've experienced. What would you say would be a kind of a piece of advice for anyone that's in a professional space right now and they want to incorporate this in, but don't really know how do they bridge that gap to create a culture that I think is or an environment that will be suited towards creating more space for that? Because I think there are many people sitting on the sidelines. And if we were to look at, D&I, it is a hot topic. It's also a very sensitive one. People also feel that they lack the confidence because perhaps they don't quite know if they have the language. And also, you've seen quite polarizing perceptions of people in genuine ignorance are also put in brackets of negative light, and that really stops people from wanting to come forward, even though their heart is in the right place to want to reach, but just haven't got a clue how. Is there a way that, like, what forms of advice could you offer to others who have the heart, like you say, and maybe they need to be the fire starter, if I may say in brackets, to get that going?
I don't know if there's like a right way to go about it, or if there's like a step by step guide to get it right. I think it has to be led by, if you are working in D&I, or you'd like to take this approach, whatever role you're in. I think the principle of it, of talking to people, engaging in conversation, and valuable conversation, has to be the start. So take away, them, putting them in front of a screen, putting them in front of people. I think as an individual, I became very curious and just listened for the first probably 6 months of my new job. I just listened to stories, and I learned significantly from people that I didn't have the same lived experience as. So I was going, actually, if I'm learning a lot, how can I share that learning with others? So I definitely think there's got to be a level of, I suppose, curiosity and that approach, that take yourself into that position and just listen to others. And then it's also, I suppose, understanding, or trying to gain an understanding of what's their level of confidence. Do you think, that they would be willing to share their story? And actually, if they will, then think about the environment you create for them. So, for example, the lived experience panel sessions I've done, none of the sessions are recorded, because I don't want people to, I suppose, be a little bit wary of where they're going. It's, people can either, come in on the session, or they miss out, so we make it really, a real special spotlight for that session. But
and a safe space, from what you're describing, it has to feel safe. That is such a key thing. I love that.
Yeah, and like, I couldn't have a conversation today with someone and go, do you know what, next week we're going to do a panel session, would you be willing to sit in it? Because it takes time to build that confidence. But I also think it's the vulnerability of me helped. So I was able to say, do you know what, I'm going to, and I actually did. So in the mental health awareness panel session we did, I sat on that panel as a panelist while someone else hosted, and I shared my story, which is very different to the others. But that was my way of going, I'm going to do it. I genuinely didn't really feel comfortable, because it's speaking to larger audiences, and I suppose it's a space in which you're going to share this with. Whereas, in general conversation, I'm happy to. So, it took a lot for me to do it. But in D&I, when we talk about allyship, and definitely when it comes to leadership, you have to role model what you're telling people. So, if I just sit back and keep my vulnerability to myself, and then I'm outwardly telling others, you must do this, build your confidence, you definitely got a story worth sharing, but then actually I'm not sharing mine, I think, that does have a big influence. So I would say that, if a vulnerability doesn't come easy, I get that. I really do get that. And some stories are more sensitive than others, which I really do respect and appreciate. But I think that if there's just like a glimpse of, even if it's not as part of a panel session, but you share a vulnerability with a person you're thinking about asking, jump onto a panel session. Because even if you just do it on that one-to-one basis, they've got someone who they can resonate with, and they can relate to, and in terms of, oh, okay, so they've had something similar, or they've had their struggles as well, and I can definitely see the power of why telling my story would be worthy. So I suppose those are just a couple of things to think about. It really isn't easy, but I think that the tone in which you're asking, the principle of why you're doing it, and I think it's just to reinforce that it is always important to reinforce the why of, by sharing your story can have a huge impact on not one person. It could after the mental health panel session, we had a number of people come forward and say, oh, I've been in that place and I felt that way. But without that panel session, those comments wouldn't have come. And we've not done anything with it since. I've not had, sent then the people who were fed back and said those comments were, okay, here's a mental health support package. I think you need to speak to this person. I think you need to go down this route. It's just about, thank you for sharing that as well. And I'm sorry you went through that, but please know that we're now creating safe spaces. If you get to that place again, you can maybe speak to someone about it and, speak to one of us. So, yeah, it is definitely a difficult one. But, in terms of opening up your vulnerability yourself and just not rushing it, take time to build the confidence of those, because especially like some stories are very, very sensitive. I suppose also in terms of the preparation, what I've always said to any panelist is, if you feel nervous and you want to pull out an hour before because you really don't feel comfortable or safe anymore, that's fine. So in terms of that easing the pressure, because it's not that them having a fear of letting people down, because actually we know that you might feel a couple of days before, fine, I'm really happy to share my story, and then all of a sudden building, they come closer and closer to the surface, and then they're like, no, I can't do it, but a stage fright, that's fine. But it's just reassuring them that that's fine. So yeah,
I think you've raised, for sure. And I think you raised some really powerful kind of tools and pieces of advice there. It really isn't a show, is it? It's really about creating a space that actually others will be able to find strength in community, and a sense of like, there is something really powerful when you can break the atmosphere of stigma. And like you mentioned, particularly like mental health is also a very huge issue that we are addressing constantly, I think, on so many different platforms, whether it's in media, whether it's in our professional spaces, in domestic spaces as well. It's a continuous conversation, and long may that be. But we've worked really hard, I think, with focusing on this issue and making it safe to people to talk openly about its impact on our everyday lives. And the more that we create room, as you've described, we just created a space so that those that were not necessarily on the panel, who are willing to put themselves forward, and huge respect to them, because like you say, in order for us to lead in a certain way, we need to model it too. And that takes a different level of courage. But see how impactful and powerful that was. It doesn't even become necessarily about your personal issue then, does it? It became like, it's for something bigger, something for me. And the person that's hearing that story that you've been so courageous to share, something is broken for them, and there's a sense of freedom there that they can find other people to connect with, and then follow through with hopefully support, help, and knowing that this is not something that there's no options for them to turn to. Because I think that's the worst thing, isn't it, when they think, well, I'm really alone, there is actually no solution for me. But what you've described in the models that you've seen in terms of creating space for this empathy and that human connection, which is so important, is literally creating these safe spaces. So I love that this is what you've experienced so far. Where would you say, for me, this feels like huge leaps and bounds in progress. Where would you say, and you would probably consider that perhaps there are other areas, or what those areas are where we still really probably need to work on more?
I think that that's a good question. I think the biggest thing for me, and this is just like I suppose reflecting on personal experience, is that the language used around D&I think that we probably need to do, in terms of when we go in working with businesses or working in any organization, I think there needs to be a genuine understanding of what we are trying to do in terms of, creating inclusive spaces, making people feel like they belong, and the understanding now, I suppose, the differentiation between the equality and equity, and actually, what is diversity? Because I think people still think they have to do something with diversity, where as it's fact. So I definitely think if organizations that are definitely in early stages maybe of moving that way, and doing more targeted work with D&I, there needs to be that foundation understanding. But I suppose the other thing for me, and this is, I suppose, reflected on workspaces that I've had, and coming from a sporting background, is there's still this ongoing need for visual representation. Because I think that, especially coming from within sport, well, we always used to use the phrase of you can't be where you can't see, and that we used to do a lot of focus around women in sport, and around the Olympics and all those type of things. And now moving into media and broadcasting, it's exactly the same principle. So to come from two very different industries, but there's the same lessons to be learned around D&I. I think that it will still continue to be this ongoing challenge that we're needing to work towards, in the sense of, bringing your genuine commitment to life. Because I think that, you do speak to so many people. And it comes out when you have these honest conversations and open conversations, and, speaking to people from communities that you're not from, to get that understanding of, why don't you apply for jobs in a certain organisation, or why don't you put yourself forward for opportunities there, or why don't you engage in an opportunity that's in another community or the next town, and those type of things. And it's because they don't see themselves fit. And I think that there has to be a real proactive approach to change that, for us to see genuine change moving forward. So I'd probably say that those are the two, in terms of getting the language right and having a genuine understanding of what it means. And, especially for those that are in early stages of implementing D&I strategies, or having someone first for the full-time role for the first time, those type of things, and outlining those expectations. And then definitely that visual representation. Definitely something I don't think, anyone's got completely right then.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. It's acknowledging there's still always going to be rooms of improvement. I think just off the back of what you said there, I think what I have found encouraging, even within, which is quite true what you're saying, there still is perhaps in some spaces that lack of, if I can't see it, then maybe I don't belong there. Is I've also seen just within even an environment like that, I've especially from women. I know we're looking at Black History Month over this next month, and that's one of the common narratives that we have. Like, I can't necessarily see the representation in various fields across the board in the professional kind of realm. But what I am seeing is that it's also inspiring, should I say, catalysts. People are trying to be the change they wish that they saw, and that has been really encouraging to see. As a result, okay, I may not see somebody sitting in this room. And it's interesting that you say that. I do remember, prior to getting involved in the DEI space, and I was working in education, I don't think I ever experienced a teacher that looked like me. In an education space. And I remember, and I share this example, I think often sometimes when we're having conversations about representation, particularly, that I remember when I was in one of my training schools, and they'd warned me to go into the classroom, bracing myself for, it was a very high achieving intellectual school of students that were really, really competent. And they were known for kind of putting the teachers on under scrutiny for their intellectual capacity, which I find so funny. And I was like, interesting, it's great. I find that a challenge. I was looking forward to meeting and engaging with these students. Only to find that I didn't receive any kind of hostility about how much are you really here as a serious teacher to show us that you're worth our time. What I saw was every young female in those classrooms that looked like me peering over the heads of other students, looking at the teacher in front of them. And I realized it's because I look like them.
Yeah.
And it was curious. And it was like actually looking at someone who spoke like me, that looked like me, that brought different kind of value into a classroom that they had not seen very often. I'm not sure they had ever seen it, but quite commonly in the areas that I was based in, I was like, of course, I forget. And I found myself being that person where, like, I'm just going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's always, I feel like, as much as I agree with you, we should be part of this improvement, pushing to see more representation, is also to realize, and even in that environment, something really good is coming out, because others are feeling like, if I can't see it, then I'm going to create the opportunity, which is also a good place to be at the table, isn't it? In terms of the big scheme of moving forward. And
one thing just to add there, I think as I've progressed in my D&I role, there's two things I suppose I think I reflect on in terms of when you speak to people, especially in other D&I roles, and this is, internationally, and they go, do you know what? It's so hard to just keep going and to be that change for someone. I'm thinking of stepping out of the D&I role, but then you think to yourself, if not me, then who?
Then who?
Yeah. And
I
then
love, there's a quote, a very, very famous Greek, sorry, not Greek, Jewish scholar, like very old, called Hillel. And I've been using that quote on my LinkedIn post, I think,
yeah,
so many times, because literally it is, there's no other way to describe it. If not me, then who? And if
yeah.
not now,
But
then when?
yeah, I was just going to say, and that was going to be my next one. In terms of like
Yeah,
timing, people will,
yeah,
organizations could put things on, on the back foot and go, you know, well, we'll wait until, we've got the right people on board, or we'll wait until this, or we'll wait until that. Be like, well, no, because if we're not going to do it now, then when are we going to do it? Because we'll think of something else of why we can't do it then
sure,
when we think of it.
sure.
So absolutely that, in terms of more so that if not me, then who? And again, but it comes with pressure, doesn't it? It comes with huge pressure that, you know, for someone to keep motivated to be that change
Yeah,
for a certain
yeah,
level,
yeah.
um, especially when they're experiencing challenges and blockers and all of this, like it is so difficult. But then
Mm,
actually the
mm,
driver is then, that could be the change for someone's life.
100%.
So yeah, definitely it's a common, I suppose, a common thought within D&I spaces, what I've learned over the last year especially.
Yeah. Hannah, this has been an incredible conversation. I feel we could go on forever and ever, but I feel it's such a good place to end at such a high note there. Just want to thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing just your constructive advice and encouragement to anyone. And I really love that we are aligned on this quote that we care about so much. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? And hopefully this will be
Yeah.
encouraging to anybody else coming across this podcast at a later stage. Hannah, thank you so much for being with us, and all the best in your endeavors as you continue to move forward in the D&I world.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.